right, good morning. You are here because for this topic, Brain Hack Studying for STEM Courses. I've done this presentation in its entirety for a lot of different audiences, but I wanted to give you an idea of why I created this in the first place. So I'm an academic advisor in the Engineering Student Success Center, and I'm also a credentialed teacher. I used to be a teacher coach. So when I started working here after being in the classroom for a long time, I realized there was a lot of common challenges that students were facing. And a lot of it had to do with, their experience, really just trying to understand what it means to be a student. Okay, so I'm sharing my screen right now. If those of you here with me, could you give me a thumbs up to make sure that you can see what I'm sharing so I can move on? Thank you again, appreciate it. So in my office, students will come in and I will ask them like, hey, what's going on? How did your test go? And sometimes, they'll tell me things like, I thought I was good at math, that test didn't go as well as I thought it was going to go. I did all the studying that I was supposed to do. Or maybe they'll go, think about like, man, math used to be really easy, or physics or chemistry. I'm just not good at it anymore. And I like to push back on that language, on that narrative, because it doesn't mean anything really. It's an experience that you're experiencing now, and sometimes calibrating or recalibrating your expectations of yourself and what it means to study is all we need to do. And I noticed, in conversation with them, they'll kind of make these comparisons with high school and college. And so I want to provide a little context. So first of all, in high school, when you took calculus, for example, you had a whole year, right, to understand that one topic. Um, and then, but when you come to San Jose State, sometimes students realize like, oh man, I should know this by now, but again, the context is different. You're learning a topic that maybe you were exposed to before, but the expectations of the instructors and also the amount of time you have to learn that one class, along with the other 13 units that you have in your semester, really does affect your performance and also your brain's ability to take in information and store it. Okay. Also, I wanted to acknowledge that, yes, there are teaching preferences and learning preferences, both from the student and the teacher. Learning styles, honestly, is not a real science because your brain can actually learn in different ways. But if we were to kind of understand the context again, when we talk about, why was it different in high school versus now? Well, the teachers had different trainings, your professors have different trainings, and the purpose for both institutions are a little different. And so keeping all of this in mind, and also thinking back to this narrative that students are bringing up with me. I find it really helpful to also to kind of break down the sort of sciences behind learning so they can really evaluate and make their time studying more effective. Okay, so when we say studying, sometimes we have an idea of what that could look like. It's looking at something, maybe reading something, listening to something, but the actual, when you look at it, it looks very passive, but your brain actually needs to really be in the information and really grapple with the concepts. And it also depends on when you are doing this studying. Studying can't just happen the night before, but sometimes students push back and say, well, cramming used to work for me. Please ask me that question later, and maybe after this presentation, it'll make more sense why it worked before versus now. Okay, but the reality is studying is complex because your brain is complex. And it requires understanding of how it actually takes in information, how oops, I'm gonna let the student in right now. how it stores that information. And then when it comes to test taking, right, the high stakes part, it's about how is your brain able to take the information it actually needs in that moment for that second question on that test so that it can show what it knows, right? So we're going to break down some concepts regarding the brain. As a former credentialed teacher, I also worked with students who were in special ed programs. And so I do have to remind everyone that everyone's brain is unique. I'm going to present some ideas in the learning sciences and some strategies that I found effective with the students I've worked with. And but overall, if you want to learn more about your learning preferences, I'm happy to make appointments with any of you so that we can kind of discuss, like, what are the things you're using? What are you, what strategies haven't you used? And what can we do to, again, continue to optimize your performance on these assessments? All right, so we're going to go over some very basic concepts. There are these, again, very basic. And so we're going to start with this idea of information coming in, information being jumbled around and stored in your brain. And, the important part to your instructors is the output. There's only really one way they can give you a grade on anything. And that is if they see what you have completed, right? See evidence of what you understand. And that's why you have assignments. That's why you have tests. That's why you have homework and projects. And so we're within, again, this context of learning something in a college classroom, right? What it starts out with is, okay, what do I need to take into my brain? Well, information, okay. Our body can only take in information in, these very limited ways. We can hear it, we can see it, we can, during labs, or maybe if you're taking a performance-based course like social dance, or you're doing labs, right? You are doing the thing, right? And in doing so, that muscle memory is being built, okay? Now, once that information floats your way, this is where your brain starts to make it interesting, because your brain actually has to pay attention to that. There's going to be external factors. There's going to be internal emotional stressors that your brain is also kind of like, hey, you got to remember this for next time. All of that will affect how you initially take in that information, right? So the hack, right, for these situations is it's not just something you can fix. It's actually when I actually have a whole series on brain hacks and how emotions and identity and all of that affect whether or not you're learning. So again, we're only going to focus on the learning part, but if your brain is distracted by the previous class that you just came out of, maybe it's worried about, getting to work on time, or maybe worried about rent. All of those basic needs are super duper important. And so again, this is one piece of it. But I'm happy to give you more information about the other parts. But going back to this, your working memory is that attention. So there's actually language and a name for it. Your working memory gets to choose what you prioritize, what you're ignoring, and what to actually process. Now, keeping that in mind, when it comes to new information, especially for some of the new freshmen, for example, that I encounter who maybe they took chemistry in high school, aren't doing so well this time, or maybe they never took or forgot the content in chemistry. So everything feels new. So that can be really daunting, especially since for the STEM courses, there's a lot of information coming your way. It's like a whole new world, actually a language that you have to know. So an important thing to keep in mind is you need to have something to get that new information to stick to. So I don't know if any of you know or remember this toy, right? It's a little Velcro padding with the ball, kind of sticks to it. It's kind of what your brain needs. Now, your success, so in a way, your success in a class can be determined by how much you already know about the content. So, coming into lecture, not having homework done, or maybe even any background knowledge can affect, kind of how you're picking up new information moving forward. So, especially with dense content, you always have to work to maybe chunk the information you're bringing in, maybe coming in with having watched a YouTube video or something on the specific concepts that is being presented in class that day. So let me show you an example. So your syllabus, and I'm sorry, I'm picking on chemistry, but it's I love how the chemistry department here has everything available for you. And I'm gonna work with Karen Singmaster. She's amazing. And she leads a lot of the um, the chemistry department. I believe she's the chair actually. But when you look at the syllabus, and when I say, you want to make sure you're intentional about exposing yourself to the content, a good place to begin is the syllabus. The syllabus will have everything. It's kind of like the rules to the game that is Passing Chem 1B in this case. I would go down to the learning outcomes, for example, and look at the language here, for example. So this one says calculate concentration using different units and convert between different concentration units. Now, if you're sitting there wondering, like, I haven't taken chemistry before, I have no idea what this is what they're talking about, an easy Google and copy and paste into, oh, that's not what I wanted. Copy that, paste that in, find something like a YouTube video, right? I don't know what that advertisement is, but the idea is when you look up the learning outcomes and then you do that a little extra work before the lecture, and you go in there not expecting to know everything, but really just knowing enough to pick up on the language, it will become easier for you to acquire the language you need for that particular lecture for that day. The syllabus will also have everything, like the timeline of what you need to know. So getting ahead of things like understanding, or at least getting a quick overview before you encounter these topics would be advisable. So moving on. So we also have, let's assume all things are going well, you have information coming into your brain. Now it's about, well, we got to store it, we got to hang on to it, and have it available for that test, exam, homework, what have you. So there's a lot of things happening in the brain and a lot of language related to it, but we're going to focus on these three ideas and these three brain rules. So storage, right? The brain rule for that is your brain actually has a limited amount of speed and data, and this can vary from person to person. It depends on what I call the mental bandwidth, meaning like what is currently occupying your brain, and do you have the energy to bring more information into that, or the capacity to bring more information to your brain. So to me, really the best way to approach STEM is to seek to speak the language of STEM. Again, it goes back to what are the specific terminology that you're expected to know, because I guarantee that when you get into the test, those word problems will contain those specific words. And because of that, you will need to, and especially if you get into a situation where you thought you were doing the right thing on this equation or this question, but because the question asks you to do something else, you got some points taken off. Well, a lot of that has to do with how well you understand the language and terminology that is presented in that content. Okay. The other reason why you would want to approach speaking the language of STEM is, if any of you have ever learned a language, so for example, I learned French in high school, and I think I did it for 3 years. But on that very last day of my French class in high school, I I can't say that I can speak to that same level. I can't read to that same level and understand the language to that same level right now because I don't actually speak it on a daily basis. So your brain actually tries to be as efficient as it can because it knows that it needs to trim down information it doesn't need so that you can get information out when you need it. So when you sleep at night, it actually will take your brain will actively cut out things that it thinks it doesn't need to know. So you have to kind of trick your brain into believing like, no, you're going to need this for next time. You're going to need this for tomorrow. You know, that first day lecture information, you're going to need that for last day of the semester. And the main way you would do that is, well, constantly going back to the content from the beginning, reviewing. And so when, we say study, again, it's not just, studying the night before, but it's actually being active in, bringing up that information so that it's constantly in your short-term, long-term and short-term memory so that it's accessible for you to use later. Especially for those for students who experience not having enough time on tests. Sometimes that constraint can feel really nerve-wracking. Absolutely. So for me, the hack for that is actually putting yourself in a test-taking scenario where part of your study is, um, you know, giving yourself a time limit so that you're kind of training your brain to access that information faster, right? So that on the actual assessment day, it's going to be able to handle that pressure plus that amount of speed that you need for that day. Retrieval. So, I talked about the storage, right? That information goes into your brain. It's hanging out in there. Now, that retrieval piece, this is where we start to think about how do we make that information stick, right? So, like I said, repetition is key. If you are constantly bringing up that information, using things like brain dumps before the lecture, it kind of reminds your brain like, oh yeah, this is really important. And in doing so, you can also, retrieval. Okay. Sorry, excuse me. In doing so, it like I said, it makes the getting the information out really fast, but it also helps you understand the information so that everything is like the back of your hand, I guess. So if you're in a test taking situation, you know that you have a specific equation, you have a specific amount of time you have in order to complete this task. And so, the repetition will help during that test taking. I'm going to move on because I'm starting to lose my words. Now, some things that can help you with retrieval of information or recall is so when I took my GREs, I needed practice, honestly, because practice is really key to making sure that information sticks. So I actually use things like apps so that if I'm standing at a grocery checkout, I am doing some exercises, and it allows me to kind of get small chunks of that information as opposed to sitting in long lectures, and I found that really useful. I also talked about let's see, study groups. Okay. Now, the thing about repeating the information over and over again is that if you're repeating the wrong things, that can also be a recipe for doing the wrong things on the test. So this is why tutoring is really important. You have to have feedback. Now, again, information goes into your brain stores it, your brain does something with it, and then now you are putting it out there into an assignment, into a test, what have you. The problem that students come upon is sometimes they don't get that feedback when they need it. And so they wait until an actual midterm to find out that they are lacking concepts or skills in that class to pass it. So getting ahead of it and going to tutoring so that not so that you can understand what you don't know is just as important as going to tutoring to find out, how to do things right. So my recommendation for this is if you are going to ask for help for a class, um, don't ask them to do the problem for you. Go in there so that they can coach you through um, the problem. So for example, you would actually narrate how you approached a midterm, like a specific question on the midterm. And in doing that, the tutor or the professor during office hours can actually give you feedback, just like a coach would have to observe and provide feedback to their athletes. Your professor or tutor needs to see how you're thinking through the problems and how you are interpreting, more importantly, the concepts of that content. So again, it goes back to language. It goes back to um, seeking to speak the language of that STEM course. Okay. So as you are processing and making sense of these things, right? Another trick is to um, as you're gaining that information to figure out how it fits into what you currently understand. So concept mapping, I do this a lot at work because I have to kind of understand policies at San Jose State. I have to understand learning preferences um, and other things related to basic needs. And so my way of like being able to capture and hold all of that information is seeing where they kind of fit and how they're related to one another. And so that could be a really powerful thing as you're getting ready for an exam, because then you're not thinking in terms of chapters, you're thinking in terms of like how these concepts build upon another. Okay, so we talked about getting feedback, office hours. Um, your instructor's office hours are listed in the syllabi. I encourage students to see their professors, especially because, well, they get paid to do that, and a lot of them want to see you in their classrooms because they care about how their students are learning. If you've never been to office hours before, I highly recommend just trying it out. It's early-ish in the semester. I'm assuming a lot of you either started your midterms sessions or maybe going into your first big midterm in the next week or so. So it isn't, so if you haven't seen your professor yet, I recommend that you do. And so when you go in there, you can either email them ahead of time, or you can just, let them know after class and tell them, hey, I want to talk more about this concept that we went over in class the other week. I'm going to come by your office hours just to give them a heads up so that they're going to be there, or maybe if they change their schedule, at least you know what to expect, at least they know what to expect. And then when you go in there, like I mentioned earlier, you want to approach it like a coaching session. Go in there with the midterm material or the homework assignment material. Bring something tangible that you can work on together. And be prepared to explain how you understand the concepts, how you are approaching the content, so that they can fine tune it, right? Because if I'm encouraging your brain to repeat so that you really get it, you have to make sure what you're repeating is actually the right thing, or else that's where our mistakes and bad habits start to formulate. Okay, and actually, the other thing I wanted to mention is, so we talked about office hours, but sometimes students don't know that we have Peer Connections, which is our tutoring destination. So if you need someone to kind of clarify, not show you how, but clarify what you're supposed to be doing in these in the class or on the midterm, They have a lot of different ways to support students. I'm only going to talk about tutoring for this one. They have a huge list, as you can see here. They update this every semester, and they try to make it accessible as possible. They have multiple locations, so this might be a good place to begin so you can see what is available, right? Everything is alphabetized, and actually what I'll do is I'm going to put this in the chat. So the tutors there are trained to help students understand. So in a very similar way of what I'm encouraging you to do, my understanding is that they're not trained to give answers, but really to help you work through problems so that you can create your understanding of the content to have it ready for your next test or exam. Okay, so going back to this. This model is actually was created to explain how to train maybe someone who wants to become a doctor, just to see to what extent the new hires understand what they're supposed to be doing. But I find it helpful to also use this to help students fine-tune their study skills and habits. And so if you were to think of maybe your most challenging class right now and thinking about where you are in the class, homework you've turned in, assignments you've completed, if you were able to put yourself in one of these levels, it will at least indicate what sort of extra work you need to put into it to get to that next level of doing really well in the class. So sometimes students will come into an exam and they'll say, yeah, I'm super confident. I know exactly, I've done all the homework. I know exactly what I need to do. But it's not until they get that feedback, again, which is really why it's important to get tutoring, get someone to coach you through what you understand. And then they find themselves actually at level 2. They don't realize what they don't know. And so once you know what that is, at least you know what you can focus on, right? And it's from there that it's more clear where you need to go for, like, whether you need tutoring or if it's just a matter of practicing. Ideally, I would argue that students who get A's in these STEM courses would actually be in that level 4 space where they can actually explain and teach another student what to do in the class, right? Again, it's the application of it, again, how well you can talk through. The content is automatic because it is already part of what they understand and know. So that would be kind of this A standard of what you need, of how well you need to know the content. Okay, so a lot of this content, just kind of wrapping up at least the presentation piece, comes from these books, Keep Sharp, Brain Rules, and Atomic Habits. If you want to learn more about how the brain learns and how to make some changes in your habits, I definitely recommend any of these 3 books. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the recording and we can maybe just check in and chat and have some discussion about what you're experiencing and maybe go through some coaching while you're here. So I'm going to stop recording right now.